Hello everyone, my name is Preedip Balaji and I'm part of the library team at IIHS. I'm happy to announce the 29th library exhibition on margins. This exhibition explores and investigates questions about marginality and vulnerability in different contexts.
Hi, I'm Pooja Sagar and I'm here with Aruna Bhattacharya, and we are here to talk about the library exhibition called Margins. Aruna, let's talk about the theme that you have given this exhibition. It's called Margins. What do you have to say to that?
So when we say or utter this word margin, it kind of, in a laymanish way, it means a boundary, a limit, a margin, so to say, like how we used to have this margin on a sheet of paper. And we writing outside the margin, meaning, some marks would be deducted. But if you're writing within the margin, this is the functional area available to that structure. So with that allegory, if we also discuss that, what gets relevant, what is not relevant, from whose point of view.
What is within those
boundaries. And I think there are many advantages to discuss this, not just sociologically, geographically, but also how that impacts human settlements in India, in Global South. And these dimensions of urban, constantly we are also aligning margins.
And a library is a good place to, articulate these experiences because we have a huge amount of resources to study this area.
I think oftentimes when we discuss scholarships around any domain, there is an academic vantage with which we engage. But then this is an engagement where it is important from public discourses. It is also important to engage local communities and to understand their version or their understanding of how it is to be on the margin, or are these processes even discussed? Because it is oftentimes we say this is marginalized, but must have happened because of a process, right? So how that process started, who started that process? The people within those margins or outside those margins, are they part of, or are they aware what is happening to their life? So how human settlements are constantly realigning or aligning or being in conflict with those, with these processes. Yeah.
Connected to what you're saying, of course, there are two things. One is, as a woman, you always experience marginalization, and that is perhaps one of the first feelings that I have had about this subject, that it was such a visceral body experience of, not being able to access the same kind of city spaces or same kind of resources that men could, and that was perhaps the first thing that I realized about marginalization. One of the things that I have observed is the theorization, or rather a critique of the way in which knowledges are constructed. So essentially there are two kinds of knowledge construction, as you can see, and my area of study is the integration between Ayurveda and biomedicine. And if you take this subject, you will see that there is often this center periphery construction of knowledges. That is to say that the center is always the norm, the power, that is where the power lies, where the authority resides. And the periphery is often used to theorize the center, but not necessarily to look at the periphery itself. There is also movement between the center and the periphery. The periphery moves on to become the center. There is a centering of some aspects of systems and people located at the periphery, but nevertheless, the center is supposedly a very strong entity, and what is not at the center gets marginalized. The other model of knowledge construction is also again from the top to bottom. That is, supposedly there is a percolation of knowledge at the top and a sort of a dispensation of knowledge to the bottom layers. Again, the imagination of these two models to me was highly political, violent, because it is almost as though there is no knowledge production at the margins or at the periphery. So I felt that this library exhibition was very relevant for us because it offers us multiple perspectives on understanding the margins. We have put together fiction, non-fiction, illustrated books, theoretical books, books that study these categories, so that all of us, children's books, yes, and all these categories, so that we can understand it much better.
So it is a good podium for us or platform for us to discuss from our own research, like who's at the periphery and when that becomes central, how the lenses shift, and it's interesting, the time dimension, so the historical aspect, the political aspect, and putting together that interdisciplinarity, the holistic, because there is always a market force. There, sometimes we say policy change, but what is that doing to a community in a long run? So talking about this library exhibition, we have 65 books and reports. As Pooja was mentioning, they're also cutting across animations. It is not necessarily like, publications, we think books, but there are also books with pictures, picture books for children. Different stories from different communities which are not known to larger public are represented. So I would say it's an eclectic mix of themes, disciplines, lens, writers and publishers from different geographies. So I picked up a couple of books to discuss this further.
Let's talk about the books that you have selected.
Sure. So this is an eclectic bunch of books cutting across different lens, themes, disciplines, publishers, and also, of course, the authors of different gender. We are also showcasing the areas of our engagement in research and practice in housing, climate change and environment, disaster, urban habitat and infrastructure, migration, social exclusion, vulnerable communities and groups, and health systems. These are also very relevant in the time, in the post-pandemic time, when we are also realigning in our imagination of how we use the city, how we use cities' infrastructure. So I think a re-look or review of these areas are interesting. Of course, from research point of view, from engagement point of view, what a marginalized community would think and see and visualize or reimagine their space as, or life as, or urban space as. That would be an interesting way to see, or as an outcome of this, engagement.
So one of the books that I thought we should look at is called Christians and Public Life in Colonial South India, 1863 to 1937 by Chandra Mallampalli. So the book essentially talks about how different streams and offshoots of Christianity within Madras Presidency came to be clubbed together as one larger group of that included both Protestants and Catholic Christians together as Indian Christians, and how court cases dealing with the validity of marriage, succession, rights of converts, etc. provide fascinating accounts of how Christians became marginalized from evolving notions of the Hindu society. So the book essentially uses law reports, legislative assembly proceedings, Catholic and Protestant newspapers and conference reports, and all of this could be synthesized to form a coherent account of how Christians contended with marginality during colonial times.
So the other book that I chose is Livelihoods at the Margins, Surviving the City. It's a foreign author by James Staples and Routledge publication from 2007. So this is an interesting book because it's also looking at livelihoods within the city. So there are questions that authors have posed. How do we position sex workers, street hawkers, drug sellers, cleaners? They are the people living on the margins of urban life who are ubiquitous but widely misunderstood and notably absent, or rather hidden from the mainstream economic analysis. Making these multi-level connections across wide range of world regions and situations, this book shows how the micro concerns of ordinary people might usually guide the macro concerns of the government, NGOs and global institutions who are engineering large-scale social economic developmental programs. So I find them are valid questions. Like, there are also communities or there are those identities that are hidden, but they're part of your economy. They are there, we're constantly engaging, but we do not want to talk about them. So this is also an interesting way, like how things are also shoved under the carpet or moved beyond the margins, yet they're there, but they're not there.
So it's an exercise on positioning the community.
Yes, that is the exact question, like how do we position? That is the question I started with.
The next book is Vulnerable India, a geographical study of disasters by Anu Kapoor. The book puts forward the socio-economic factors as the cause of the recurrence of disasters. And there are several factors that are recurring that create and perpetuate vulnerability of the marginalized sectors of societies in India, and the book brings that forward.
This book is titled Marginalization in Globalizing Delhi, Issues of Land, Livelihood and Health. It's actually an edited volume and there are a bunch of authors. This book takes an attempt to analyze how developmental projects in globalizing Delhi have brought about neglect, exclusion, alienation of certain sections of population while benefiting others.
Urban Marginalization in South Asia, Waste Pickers in Calcutta. The book is written by Nandini Sen. The book looks at waste pickers of Calcutta and brings up the large scope of studying the negotiation skills of waste pickers as alternate resistance to exploitation through non-participation and non-cooperation. And in fact, she says that there is a large scope for studying the negotiation skills of the waste pickers in Calcutta.
When we talk about margins, marginality, marginalization, religion or the religious identity becomes one of our dimension or one of our focus areas. So here is a book called Margins of Citizenship, Muslim Experiences in Urban India, written by Anasua Chatterjee. It's a Routledge publication, 2017. It's an ethnographic study of marginality of Muslims in urban India. By narrating lived experience of ordinary Muslims, the author attempts to construct their identities as citizens and subjects. What emerges is a highly variegated picture of group, otherwise viewed as monolithic, that resides in close quarters more because of compulsions than choice, despite wide differences across language, ethnicity, sect and social class.
I have also been fascinated by this book called Anand. It's an illustrated children's book by a Bangalore-based illustrator called Rajiv Aib. And this is a book that all of us must definitely buy and have in our collection. So beautiful.
It's all handmade, I mean hand-drawn.
Yeah, and also it's as someone who's been living in Bangalore for many years, these are everyday scenes that you see here. The main character Anand is someone that we meet every day, and it's wonderful that Pratham has also tried to bring up subjects like this into their illustrated collections.
Narratives from the Margins, Aspects of Adivasi History in India. This is actually an interesting book and I really loved reading it. It's by Sanjukta Dasgupta and Rajashekar Basu. When we are talking about Adivasis, especially first the ideology, positionality and also the politics around it. How we ourselves as human beings also often are in transition. It's also that constant thing that we try to box things, try to put things within some margin, try to put things outside the margin, and how this process is, always happening.
A book published in 2017, Climate Change, Vulnerability and Migration. The book foregrounds how climate change has affected migration in the Indian subcontinent, and it demonstrates how the socio-economical poor are the worst affected due to the depletion of biophysical diversity and resort to migration for survival during the times of crisis.
So the other book that I picked is written by our own colleague, IIHS colleague, Gautam Ban. It's called In Public Interest, Evictions, Citizenship and Inequality in Contemporary Delhi. I felt this is an interesting addition to, because we constantly talk about slums, constantly talk about vulnerable populations, but how those processes start, because oftentimes it's very easy to from our lens of like urban settlement discussion, that okay, we need to clear up the urban space, we have to evict or we have to resettle these colonies. But when eviction is happening, it is not just a geographical situation, it's also a lot of connected processes that community is going through. I would actually like to read a passage. It's very poignant. There is an encroachment, said the Delhi High Court, on the ring road, on the left side of the T-junction of the ring road, Bhairo Road crossing. To the people who lived there, the encroachment was a basti called Nangla. Over nearly 20 years, Nangla had been transformed from a swamp area near the river Jamuna in the southeastern part of Delhi into a settlement housing over 2,800 families, nearly, which is about 15,000 people, like other bastis of Delhi. Its residences were mostly service providers to the city, domestic workers, recyclers, rag pickers. So, if we remember the book that we discussed of James Staples, oftentimes these livelihoods, which are often informal, and how our habitats, resettlement colonies or colonies which are kind of resisting eviction notices, and this economy, livelihood, housing, margins, these are all crisscrossing. So when I just when I read this passage, it is like again these questions: whose point of view are you looking at, the insiders or outsiders? Of course there are truths, but then which truth do we go about? Create more evictions, create more beautiful looking cities, but hiding pain and trauma and socioeconomic identity or cultural identities of these people.
We welcome you all to the library exhibition at IIHS Public Library, Sadashiv Nagar, Bangalore, to see the wide array of books that's available in the library. The library itself is open to the public. The exhibition is open to the public. It will be open till December. And if you are in Bangalore, and if you have some time to spare, and if you have some burning questions that you'd like to ask or engage in discussion with any of the researchers or students or scholars or the library staff available here, please come to IIHS.